Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from Ohio. Thanks for coming for today's discussion on China's ambitions in space. I'm Ling, and I work as a science reporter for the South China Morning Post. The Post is an English newspaper headquartered in Hong Kong. It's been around for more than 100 years, and it has bureaus across the world. So I technically belong to the DC bureau. Um, so before we start today's talk, let's watch a short video from the Chinese space station. About a month ago, there was a crew shift on Tiangong space station. So three Chinese astronauts arrived on Tiangong with a whole bunch of things, including a device that is very similar to an air fryer that we use in our kitchen, so that they can have chicken wing barbecue in space.
抽油烟机做到了这个炉子里面，就是一个内建净化功能的热风烘烤机。我们终于也做成了一个能够在空间站上使用的烘烤机的炉子，一个炉子啊。这件事呢，实际上是首次。
Okay, so everybody seemed to be having a great time. Little did they know that a few days later, when the previous crew were ready to come back to Earth, they found a crack in the window of their spaceship. It turns out the window was hit by a tiny piece of space debris, and the ship was no longer safe to return humans in. So this crew had to borrow their co-workers' ship and then come back to Earth. Now that new crew has a new ship docked at Tiangong as their lifeboat. So everything's fine now, but there was actually that was actually a space barbecue followed by the first ever emergency operations in the history of China's manned space program. Everything was done in 20 days. Okay, so to understand China's ambitions in space, first of all, we need to understand how space activities are organized in China and how that compares with NASA. And then we will also look at what China has achieved in low Earth orbit to the moon and Mars. And then we will quickly go through the international collaboration part, which countries China has been working with and which they are not working with, and what are the major obstacles. So China has a top-down government-led approach to space. It has very deep military roots. As we can see here, this man, his name is Qian Xuesen, and he is seen as the father of China's space program. He was born in China, trained in the US as an aerodynamics expert. He actually helped create NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And after he came back to China, he helped China build its own missiles, rockets, and satellites. So this picture was taken in 1955 when Qian and his family were finally able to come back to China after being put under monitoring by the US government for 5 years. So today, from the transportation to the launch of rockets to the tracking of satellites, these are all overseen by the military. The human spaceflight part is also overseen by military. The early astronauts, here we can see the first male and first female astronaut China has ever trained. They are both military pilots by profession. So anything that is not manned, like robotic civilian missions, they are coordinated by a different agency known as the China National Space Agency, but they only coordinate projects. They work like a project manager, but they don't build anything. Okay. And since China has been excluded from all the major space, international space projects, if China wants to do anything in space, it needs to rely on itself. So there is this gigantic state-owned space contractor known as CASC, which basically builds everything from all these long march rockets to all kinds of spacecraft. And here is a major component of the Tiangong space station. It is one of the three modules of the T-shaped Tiangong. So this module is about 4 meters wide, 80 meters tall, and about 23 metric tons. It is huge. And the only rocket among these that is powerful enough to send such a module into low Earth orbit is this one, Long March 5B. Okay, another Long March rocket that's worth mentioning is probably this one that has a needle kind of thing on top of it. This is dedicated to sending astronauts into space, and this needle thing on the top is actually an emergency escape system. So at this point, it is quite clear that China never had an agency like NASA to manage everything civilian space. And space activities are split among a number of agencies. Like we mentioned, the Manned Space Agency, the National Space Agency, and CASC. Of course, there are other big players. For instance, the Chinese Academy of Sciences. They are able to build all kinds of science satellites. They are actually building a space telescope that is about the same size as Hubble, but 3 times as powerful as Hubble. Okay, if you have a top-down government-led approach, you are usually good at long-term planning. So long-term, how long? Major programs in China usually spend over multiple decades. For instance, the manned space program in China was first approved in 1992. So by the time Tiangong was completed in 2022, that was 30 years in the making. And then for the moon missions, they were first approved about more than 20 years ago. And these moon missions are actually a very good example of step-by-step planning China is really good at. So for you to be able to explore the moon, so China actually did it in 3 steps. The first step is orbiting. You need to be able to send a spacecraft over to the moon, and then that spacecraft be captured by the moon's gravity to be able to orbit it and map the surface from above. And then once you can do anything, you can try landing to touch down on the surface without crashing. Once you can do landing, you can try to grab moon rocks from the sample and then bring them back to Earth for scientific analysis, right? And then within each of these steps, China actually built 2 identical spacecraft. So for instance, Chang'e 1 and Chang'e 2, they are identical. And Chang'e 2 is often called a backup of Chang'e 1. If Chang'e 1 failed, Chang'e 2 would be launched to do exactly the same thing as Chang'e 1. But if Chang'e 1 succeeds, Chang'e 2 will be repurposed to do something else. So basically, each mission and each step builds the technical foundation for the next. And similarly, if you know how to explore the moon, you have an idea about how to explore Mars and beyond. So because China is a latecomer to space, it has been doing a lot of catching up. For instance, by the time Tiangong was completed, the International Space Station had been running for more than 20 years, and thousands of experiments had been done on the ISS. Another example is Mars exploration. NASA has landed on Mars for 8 or 9 times, but China has only had one mission so far. That mission in itself is impressive because it successfully deployed 3 major components: an orbiter, a lander, this is a lander, and a rover. All these 3 things on China's first try. We need to know that more than half of the spacecraft human beings had ever sent towards Mars, never made it there. And landing on Mars is way more difficult than landing on the moon because Mars has a very thin atmosphere and Mars has a greater gravity than the moon. Of course, in this process, China also achieved some firsts. So one interesting example is earlier this year, there was a refueling service between 2 satellites in high Earth orbit. So this event grabbed a lot of attention from an international media because such a technology in orbit servicing and refueling is actually dual use. Okay, if a satellite can refuel another satellite, it effectively extends that satellite's lifespan, which is very good. But such a technology can also be potentially used to capture and tow a non-cooperative spacecraft. So this is space tracking company based in Europe. So they first reported this refueling event, and they also pointed out that 2 American spy satellites actually also came over. They flanked these 2 Chinese satellites from different directions just to see what was going on. Okay, another first for China is it has now 2 communication satellites at the moon, which technically are the first ever infrastructure put on the lunar environment. So in order to support its far side moon missions, China launched Triqiao in 2018 and Triqiao 2 last year to the moon so that data can be relayed between Earth and the far side of the moon. So now Triqiao and Triqiao 2, they look very similar. They have a big umbrella-shaped antenna. It's like it's textile. It's not metal. It's textile, about 4 meters across, very big, and coated with a thin layer of gold to better reflect radio waves. Okay, so these 2 satellites are both still they are both operational. They operate from different orbits. And Triqiao 2, the new one, is way more powerful than the first one. It can support up to 10 instruments working at the same time. So not just Chinese instruments. One day if another country needs to use Triqiao 2, they totally can. Another first, maybe a lot of people have heard about, is last year, China returned the first ever moon rocks from the far side. Okay, so all previous sample missions, including the Apollo missions, the USSR's lunar missions, and also China's Chang'e 5 missions, those are all rocks from the near side. So this is the first time that human beings have rocks from the far side of the moon. So look at this lander. There is a robotic arm that can reach out to scoop rocks from the surface. And then there is a drill somewhere also on this lander that can reach down to about 1 to 2 meters deep to get drill samples. So altogether, drilling and scooping, China got about 2 kilograms of them and returned to Earth. So these samples are very unique. They will teach scientists why the far side and near side of the moon look so different. And also because Chang'e 6 landed in the oldest crater in the solar system. So there is a chance that we will finally be able to tell how old this crater is. And this age is very, very critical in ruling out or confirming theories about the formation of the moon and the formation of the solar system. So moving forward, China is working hard on some major projects. It might be leading, but I'm not sure. I have a question mark here simply because I don't have enough information on the progress about the progress on the US side or anywhere else in the world. So one thing China is working on is to build a research base on the moon. Chinese people love building things, and Earth is not the limit. So first of all, you need to figure out how to make bricks on the moon. So scientists have used simulated moon bricks. So these are samples with slightly different ingredients. And they send these samples up to the Tiangong space station and expose them to the very harsh space environment to test how well they hold up, in the radiation and the dramatic temperature change. And some of these samples have already come back to the Earth. And China's goal is to make the first bricks with real moon soil on the lunar surface in 2028. And how would the moon base look like? There is actually a community of hundreds of scientists, engineers, and architects, now the experts across China working on the design. So here we can see all these different designs. They are supposed to work for different type of terrains. For instance, relatively flat surface or inside a crater, and they even designed moon base that will be built in the underground lava tubes. So another thing China might be leading is to return moon rocks from the red planet. So at this point, the fact that China is in the lead is quite surprising to many people, simply because of the fact that NASA has been working on Mars for so many years, and dozens of tubes of samples have already been collected and spread on the Mars surface. And they just need to be returned to the Earth. So we still need to wait and see how NASA is going to deal with the technological and budgetary uncertainties. Well, for China, it has declared, like officially, the timeline. They're going to do this. The plan is to launch the mission in 2028 and then return samples about 3 years later. And then another thing that gets talked a lot about is landing astronauts on the moon. The current timeline for the U.S. is to launch Artemis 3 mission to land two American astronauts on the moon in 2027. And China has said they are going to do this before 2030. But more and more people have been talking about how realistic the U.S. timeline is, because it'll be less than 2 years, and there are still major technologies that haven't been developed or tested, including the giant moon lander. But I want to say that to a lot of Chinese, including space officials in China, it really doesn't matter who will land on the moon first, because to China, there's no place. The US made it there more than 50 years ago, and they made it multiple times. And China is just doing its own thing. Okay, we will go over international collaboration really fast. So China has been working with dozens of countries, helping them build, launch, and run Earth observation satellites, communication satellites, ground stations, and a lot of other things. And then when it comes to pure science in space, China and Europe has a long tradition of working together. There have been major projects going on since 20 years ago. And China and Europe has also been working a lot on the Chang'e missions. China actually helped Europe land their first scientific instruments on the near and far side of the moon. And China will have more partners in the upcoming Chang'e 7 and Chang'e 8 missions, because those are bigger and more complicated missions. So when it comes to moon exploration, there are two so-called camps right now. One camp was led by the US under the Artemis Accord principles. And the other one is led by China. A different group of countries have signed on to build the ILRS, the International Lunar Research Station, together with China. Of course, this is a map from a year and a half, so it needs updated, but just to give you an idea. Okay, so it is well known that China and the US do not work together in space. It is safe to say that legal obstacles are on the US side. So one of the major obstacles is called the Wolf Amendment. It was put in place by a Republican Congressman, Wolf. Basically, if NASA wants to get money from Congress each year, they need to promise not to work with the Chinese government and any Chinese organizations directly, unless there is a special approval from the Congress. There is another US export law called ITAR back from the 70s. ITAR itself is very complicated. But just to explain an idea, so for instance, you built an instrument and you have an opportunity for your instrument to ride freely with a Chinese mission. But there are some small parts that are made in the US. Okay, then you will not get to ride with the Chinese mission, because no US component or parts is allowed to fly on a Chinese rocket. Now we have seen exceptions. For instance, back in 2018, NASA and the China National Space Agency briefly exchanged so that NASA can snap a photo of China's Chang'e 4 spacecraft landing on the far side of the moon for the first time ever in human history. And then last year, China was loaning out its moon rocks to foreign researchers, including a researcher from Brown University and a researcher from Stony Brook University. So both of them are able to bring the samples into the US and into their lab and use them and return whatever they do not use back to China, but they cannot use NASA funding to do any of that. They need to use university funding or some other funding. So because of the rise of China in space, there has been a lot of talks about, collaboration. For instance, Wolf has retired, but the Wolf Amendment is still around. And there have been recent debates about whether we should keep such an amendment. There seem to be enough reasons on both sides to do and not do it. Well, I guess the bottom line is we should keep the communication channels open for very practical reasons. For instance, China and the US are both going to build bases on the moon. Of course, the moon is a big place, and the moon South Pole is a big place, but it's always helpful to know what the others are doing. And with the Earth orbits getting more and more crowded, the space debris issues, emergency will happen, and we will need to help each other out, just like what happened to the Tiangong space station last month. The astronauts will need to help each other out. And last but not least, if the Wolf Amendment is still in place, then astronauts won't be able to share chicken wings in space. Okay, that's it for my phone. Thank you very much.
Terrific, terrific presentation. Raised many, many questions. You ended on this cooperating on space debris since of this accident that happened. But I mean, everybody is contributing to space debris, but China did so in 2007. Danny Roy was asking when it tested an anti-satellite thing. Has China now sworn off that sort of thing, or might we see more such efforts?
Yeah, China has been working on it. So some of the rockets that they designed, they just didn't have a way to control where they fall. The debris would fall. And if you need to add that part, it's going to cost like by the millions. It's just going to be really expensive. So an interesting thing that they do is they would always know that where the debris is gonna fall. Sorry, you're talking about debris in space.
Yeah, but debris in space, but also China tested a satellite destroyer in 2007, which caused a lot of consternation in the international space community.
Yes,
Is
that
that
was.
have they promised not to do that again?
Uh, um, that was a single event. I don't think China has been doing that regularly.
So
Um,
that was a one-off.
yeah, that was a one-off event.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, let's. One of the things that I found interesting is you mentioned early on that China's been excluded from international cooperation, but given its close relations with Russia, why hasn't it been more done more collaboration with the Russians?
Well, like China has a relatively short history of space development exploration. Um, so, of course, we have different versions of stories why China is never part of the International Space Station. But if you think about when the International Space Station was first designed or envisioned, China had very, very little to contribute.
Hmm.
China basically did not have money, did not have technology. Back then, they only had like one Beidou satellite, which they called, the first phase of the Beidou GPS system. It's not like they didn't want to have more. They only had the money to put up one or two above China.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, but later in the 2000s, China did ask to be part of the ISS again. Um, so by that time, I guess it's geopolitics that it just never worked.
Is there any sign that China and Russia are becoming more cooperative? Are there more exchanges, scientific and otherwise?
Well, the lunar base, the concept was proposed by China and Russia
Uh-huh.
together. But
Uh-huh.
as you know, Russia has not been doing as much as China when it comes to the moon in the past 20 years.
Hmm.
So, what China might want Russia in this is their nuclear power um, thing that will absolutely be China will need to run the moon base.
Hmm.
China does not have that technology right now.
So that's a micro nuclear generator or something that.
Yes.
And speaking of that base, Dan Saltman asked, what are the goals for that base at the South Pole? I mean, what
Well,
are they to accomplish?
it's called the research base. So
Hmm.
basically, they will do scientific research, but I
Hmm.
think they are also very interested in, the so-called resource utilization.
Uh-huh.
So that's why people like to go to the South Pole. There's water ice. So with water ice, you can use that for all the things that you need,
Uh-huh.
right?
So in the medium term, is there some hope that of commercializing the lunar and eventually, I suppose, Martian resources?
Well, in China, the government is still leading.
Hmm.
You need to know the commercial space sector of China just started maybe 10 years ago because the Chinese government did not approve it until 2014. So China is still lagging, although it has the biggest private space sector outside the US.
Yeah. No,
Um,
what I meant was, are there commercial opportunities on the moon? Are there minerals? Is there something
yeah,
going?
yeah, China is really looking at the helium resources on the moon, and they are working on a kind of a device which can throw um, extracted helium back
Uh,
to Earth.
yes, we all know helium's in short supply right now. Frank Stanley asks about China's plan for a space launch platform in Djibouti. Is there any progress on that
Oh,
in Africa?
I didn't know about that.
Oh. Um, yeah, so have you seen any plans for space platforms in other countries, that China would provide?
No, I just know that unlike the US, China has very limited access when it's outside China. Uh,
Hmm.
yeah, they even have very few space stations. So
Hmm.
it's yeah always challenging for
I
China.
mean, ground stations, I mean.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, ground stations, yes.
Um, just briefly, you mentioned the first satellite being a geolocation or GPS. China is now in the process of creating a much more complete GPS system, correct? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Oh yeah, Beidou. That's what China. Oh, that's the Chinese version of GPS. So China would like to have a version of their own in case there is, geopolitical tension, and they just don't have access to GPS satellites anymore. So China has. So So the Beidou is working very well, and they are having clients outside China, a lot of them. And China has also proposed to build a GPS system at the moon. So one day you will need that.
Hmm. But so the Beidou system, how many satellites does that require?
I think they right now they have more than the GPS. GPS has maybe 2 dozen right now.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so Beidou satellites has three different kinds of orbits. I think they might have 30 something in operation right now.
Hmm. And in a similar vein, what about things like Starlink? Is there a Chinese version of Elon Musk's massive
Yeah,
number of low orbit satellites?
yeah. Of course, China is following very closely in this aspect. So the central government has a plan called Guowang, which will eventually comprise maybe 14,000 satellites, which is very similar to Starlink. Right now, they have 120 maybe put in high orbit, and we need to know that local governments, for instance, the Shanghai government also has a similar constellation, about 13,000 satellites eventually. Um, that's called Qianfan, and they are looking for rockets to launch them because China simply does not have enough rockets to launch all these satellites. And I've also heard other plans. There are certainly third or fourth constellation in the plan.
So I'm sorry, China is going to have more, two or three or four uh,
Mhm.
uh, Starlink like systems going. Why wouldn't they try to keep it down to one or two? I mean, what's the point of having so much competition?
I have no idea, but I think the central government, that one is for they might have military implications with
Mhm.
that one because China got really nervous because of Starlink's capability, not just civil but also military.
Hmm.
But the one with Shanghai government that was backed by, you know, because Shanghai has money and they just want to do it and they think there is a business opportunity in there, maybe. So,
Now I mean, for an American, that's I mean, that's like California deciding it's going to have its own, satellite system. It's
yeah, but I don't
kind
know.
of a thing.
For instance, Amazon is also going to have put together right?
Yeah,
Amazon.
mhm. Yeah. So
Mhm.
that brings us back to this whole issue of space junk, because there's going to be so many of these satellites roaming around. Eventually, there's going to have to be some sort of international cooperation, sort of a traffic cop for the sky. Beverly Burden asks if there are any specific international collaborations that China envisions for things like active, of removing space debris, but also how we can leverage these new technologies to sort of clean up the, space.
Yeah, China does have companies. We don't know about the government because they're not transparent about this. I don't know there are companies who are dedicated to clean up the space debris. But cooperation, it's just been really difficult because China and the US are the two countries that have created the most space debris. And China even can't talk to NASA
Mhm.
because that's against the law.
So the Wolf Amendment makes it illegal for NASA to have any communications with. What about at the foreign ministry level or through diplomatic channels? So there's no way that that can be part
I
of the ongoing. I mean, everybody, I think, over the last few years, as U.S.-China relations have become more and more frayed, people have been looking for ways that we might cooperate in certain areas on, environmental things or, some non-political, non-stress areas. it seems that, cleaning up space junk or agreeing on some rules of the road in the highway and this in space would be kind of interesting uh, efforts in that field.
Yeah. So that is why there are renewed discussion about if we should remove the Wolf Amendment, but legally, technically, it's very, very difficult.
Hmm.
Like it just needs to be annulled, I was told. I don't remember the specifics, but yeah, there are some communications actually in the military. I don't know, like because NASA is everything civilian, and NASA can talk to China. Um,
Mhm. Yeah, actually, Ash Ramani says, does the Wolf Amendment allow for non-technical cooperation, for example, with social dynamics studies for lunar Mars settlements, like the Hawaii SEAS project at UH Manoa?
like, do they use NASA funding?
I don't know. Ash, do they use NASA funding? Yes, he thinks so.
Oh, wow, that's very interesting.
But that would mean that they couldn't have any cooperation in that field, right?
Yeah, there needs to be a special case-by-case approval, or you make it multilateral, not
Uh-huh.
just US, China. You make it multilateral. You
Uh-huh.
bring in other countries.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it does. I do find it strange that somehow China and Russia aren't more collaborating in some of these areas. But I guess, as you said, the patterns go back many, many years, and so China's now started its own. One of the key issues I think that the U.S. government worries about is militarization of space. And is it at all possible to separate within the Chinese space system what is purely civilian and perhaps purely military? I mean, you mentioned these refueling satellites, which obviously, in order to refuel, you have to be able to catch and capture, the target. It, I assume it's just very opaque, right?
Yeah, I think even the pure science thing, I know those satellites built by China and Europeans, like, they are built at the Chinese Academy of Sciences, which is a pure basic science
Mhm.
institute. Um, once once the satellite is built, it goes over to the military because they need to arrange, how it is transported and how, all the launch sites are arranged by the military. So it's really hard. It's all mingled together.
Mhm. Has there ever been talk of a private sector missile uh, launch capacity? You say that there's an issue of insufficient capacity for launching some of these low Earth orbit satellites. We have Amazon, we have Musk, we have Bezos, we have Musk building missiles here. Any possibility that at some point BYD will start making rockets for it?
No, you're not wrong. I think BYD is working on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. China actually, this month, actually tomorrow, it will be testing the second reusable rocket. Um, if you're just talking about, like commercial rockets.
Hmm. Yeah.
China never had anything like Falcon 9.
Hmm.
Falcon 9 is the only one that enabled SpaceX to do so many things, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So China is about to have that, but it will be 3 to 5 years, even if, China
Hmm.
can fly its reusable rocket until it's stable, you know. So the satellite market is exploding, but the
Hmm.
bottleneck right now is the rocket.
Hmm.
You can't keep up making so many rockets.
Right.
So so there are about 20 rocket companies in China, and six of them are really capable. So the Chinese market is not like the US one. We do not have a SpaceX, okay, but we have multiple ones that are competing against each other.
And who, so they're competing against each other to provide rockets to launch satellites.
Yes, that is a
But
pie they're
that are not that were not built by the military, by the government. So there'll be a
yeah.
sort of a private sector.
No, just for instance, the Starlink like constellations, that is a big pie, that is a big cake for you to divide. It can feed so many companies, if you can do that.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, I think we're going to have to draw to a close. A really remarkable uh, presentation of very eye-opening and lots of food for thought. Certainly going to personally look into the Wolf Amendment because I didn't realize it was quite this draconian. Thank you very much for your presentation, and we hope to hear from you again soon.
Thank you.
And now